But we are totally here for it as always. And I think we're live on Facebook. Hi, everyone on Facebook. That was a slight ordeal to get that all going. Very excited to talk to you a little bit more about this. Last week, we opened up the conversation about if you have symptoms but you keep being told that you're normal but you don't feel normal, then that's not normal. And that a lot of women identified with the fact that they feel like they're constantly being told, and in fact, we put a poll out for you guys to go and check out, and the results for that were quite astonishing in the sense that it was almost 100% of you said that you have been told that you are normal on paper when it comes to your tests, but you don't feel normal. And that to me screams out so many things that we need to talk about. So if you are here for it tonight, please share with somebody that you love and care for that we're live, that they might like to come and join us here. Also, these will be saved on both Facebook and Instagram. You can definitely share them afterwards. But so many women need to hear this information because so many women are told that they are normal when in fact probably they're not. If you have symptoms, yet your test results are saying, no, you're fine, there's some reasons for that, and we need to get to the bottom of that. And so let's talk about that. I think one of the main reasons that we see this happen, as I was saying last week, is that we might be going to a health provider that doesn't necessarily know how to interpret results. And it takes a really long time to learn how to do that. And it takes somebody that has a specialist area in whatever you're looking into or researching when it comes to yourself that knows how to do that. And I was recently speaking with a colleague, and she mentioned how she had referred one of her patients on to a health provider, a medical doctor, to get some testing done. And so she referred on, said, I think you need your thyroid looked at, and I think you need some medication. And she referred to the referring GP. Now, the referring GP, didn't think that the patient needed any extra testing, and also didn't know what to do with the testing. And as a result, it was a little bit of a slippery slope and a little bit of battle of the egos. He got quite upset and quite frustrated. And I don't think, what is Sean writing? Paul Bunyan. Who's Paul Bunyan? Anyway, hi, Paul. So the point is, I feel like there is this huge gap that exists between a GP who is there to absolutely help you to the next step, but they might not always be, unless their specialist area is women's health and hormones, they might not be the best person to be looking at your results, and they're going to literally read the report. That's what their job is. There's a sequence of events that need to happen for us to get testing right. And it needs to be the right test at the right time by the right person, read by the right person. There's a lot of things that exist for us to be able to get the answers that we need. And I want to give you a little bit more information with this. And Sean's teasing me. Sean, we're going to get everybody to download your lab report. You just need to play nicely with the people. Don't tease me, because then I'm going to not be able to deliver the goods at the end. So you've got to hang around. I'm going to give you guys a code to do that. But in the meanwhile, we need to look at testing, and we need to look at the right testing. And I think also a lot of women find that they're being told that they don't need tests even though they want them. Two rights make a left. Great. And so they're being told that they don't necessarily need these tests when they probably do. They just need the right person to do it and the right person to interpret that. And I think that story is really common, where women will say, I've asked my doctor to test these things, but my doctor has said no. Or I've asked for a full thyroid panel, but my doctor's only done TSH. Or my doctor has done my thyroid panel, and thyroid's really common. I'm just using that as one example of many where we really get it wrong. And as I mentioned during the week, this is a great example actually, because TSH reference ranges, that's your thyroid stimulating hormone reference ranges, were changed in 2003. They previously were, so long as you sat between 0.5 and 5 when it came to your TSH, you were considered normal. Those reference ranges were changed in 2003 to be between 0.3 and 3. Now, that's vastly reduced the ranges so that if you are sitting at now 3, previously or prior to 2003, those results would have been considered normal. Now, if you're sitting at 3 beyond 2003, that means that you're now sitting, according to those reference range changes, you're now sitting at high normal, if not really high. And this is, like I said, one example of many, but here's where the problem is. Hear me out. Not all doctors know that those reference ranges have changed. Since 2003, not all path labs have updated their reporting and their reference ranges, which means that you're getting mixed answers when your doctor is reading your thyroid stimulating hormone. When they're reading that, they are possibly, if they don't know these things and if the path lab hasn't updated these reference ranges, you're being told you're normal when you're not. And so this is when we need to go down the road of discovery and self-discovery and advocating for what we need. If I don't feel good, then chances are there's a reason that you don't feel good. It's not just because this is your life now and that you've just been dealt with this. It's not just because we're not accepting that it's just because you're getting older. That's not how this works. So there's always a reason, and thyroid is just one. So you can start to see I feel like that's a great example, because if that's happening with thyroid, imagine how many other things that's happening with, where there is misinterpretation of results, or the results aren't happening at the right time. And like I said, they're not being read by the right person. So let's talk about timing of results, because I feel like that's the next thing. And again, this is where I often see, if you're seeing somebody that doesn't have a special interest in these areas, that you will often go to your GP and ask for hormone testing, let's say, and they say, sure, no problem. Or I heard this one today and I've heard this many times. And if you are being told this, then it's time to find a new doctor. That your hormones are always changing, so there's no point in testing them. I have heard that so many times. How ridiculous of an answer that is. And you know what? Unfortunately, I am going to put it out there and say it. That's just someone being very lazy that doesn't know what they're looking at. That's what that is. So if you're told that, run and find a new health provider, because that is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. But this is why timing becomes very important, because if you aren't testing at the right time, you don't know your cycle, or you don't have a regular cycle, then that can be really misleading and misguiding. So when it comes to testing your hormones, the best test is definitely a dry urine test, or something like a Dutch test. And that's because of the accuracy and the way that it tests. It looks at, oh no, my phone's gone to sleep. It looks at your hormone. It looks at your urine and tests your hormones over the course of a day, not just one moment or window in time, because there's lots of other factors that impact that throughout the day. Your cortisol, your melatonin, your stress levels, or cortisol, I said. And so we need to be able to look at the timing of that. And what we know is that on the second day of the cycle is a really good time to be testing, especially for FSH and LH, follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, because we know where those ranges should be. Same with estrogen to a degree. You're not going to have much progesterone at that point, or you technically shouldn't have too much progesterone at that point of the cycle. And so this is why testing on cycle day 21 becomes also important if you have a regular cycle, or if you can pinpoint ovulation and you know that cycle day 21 is roughly 7 days after ovulation. So here's the if. If you aren't ovulating within that time and you go and do a test on cycle day 21, you might get a completely, I'm going to say the word bum steer. You're going to be taken on a bum steer, because they're expecting you to have ovulated at that point in time based on a 28-day cycle, based on ovulating on cycle day 14. So you go along, you do your blood test on cycle day 21, and then you are not necessarily getting a true reflection, because you haven't ovulated, and then you're getting told that you've got no progesterone, and you're not going to really produce much of that until after ovulation. So you can see the timing becomes very important, but knowing your body also becomes important. And so for patients who have longer cycles that are definitely able to tell when they ovulate, then we just get them to do that test 7-ish days after they've ovulated, give or take. You've got a little bit of leeway with that, but not too much. But if you are going to your doctor and they don't know that and they're just testing on any given day, then you're not going to necessarily get great accuracy in looking at where your hormones are. And we do cycle day 21 on all those 7 days after ovulation because we know where your hormones should be at around that time. And so whilst it's not going to ever be 100% foolproof, it's the time that we know the most, or we can see the most, and it'll give us the most information. So if you are testing, and you might choose to do a blood test, and often with patients when they first come in, I will actually just get them to do a blood test. We can run that, or we can send them to their GP to do a bulk bill test. I don't mind which way you do it, so long as you do it. And then we can look at whether or not we need to go and test further down the track when we see if there are discrepancies, or maybe we're not seeing what we need to see because a blood test is, like I said, it's just a snapshot of a window in time. One other thing I'll say about testing, if you are doing blood testing, I like to encourage patients to do it at the same lab and the same time. That's another variable. So we're trying to minimize variables. So if you're not jumping around path labs, you're not jumping around doctors if they're able to do it in a way that is what you need, and you are reducing the variables by doing it at the same time, I feel like that can be important. But also really do realize that it is a moment in time, and when we're testing things like cortisol, I had a patient once that came to me. She booked in because she'd been diagnosed with adrenal fatigue, which is still it's not that it doesn't exist, and it's not that your adrenals can't be in overdrive, but the diagnosis as such is still something that is not a recognized diagnosis in the medical model anyway. But anyway, she'd been told by her GP that she'd had adrenal fatigue and she should go and see a naturopath or a herbalist. And it was very interesting because when I looked over her blood tests and we had some conversation around her symptoms and signs, I said to her, the only thing that was high was her cortisol. Nothing else made sense with this. And I said, what happened the day that you had this test? And she said, oh, I absolutely loathe blood tests. I get so scared. I get so stressed out. I don't sleep the night before. I'm worried they're going to find something, even though I know there's nothing wrong. And I just hate having them done. And so I get really stressed out. I remember saying to her, you don't even need me. I actually don't think I just sent her on her way. I'm like, you don't need me. There is nothing wrong with you. You definitely don't have adrenal fatigue. By the time you get to the point of your adrenals being that far down the line that they're exhausted, you're going to have far more symptoms than what she had, and really all she had was elevated cortisol. So it's about being able to definitely look at your symptoms alongside your test results and know what you're actually testing for and what you're looking for. Blood tests, so I just said about the Dutch test is probably the best and most accurate for hormones. Like I said, I will start with a blood test. The other reason I like to get a blood test is because to test thyroid, we need to do a blood test to do that. And so when it comes to thyroid testing, the main thing to understand, I feel, is it doesn't really matter when you do it in your cycle, but if you're going to do it and we're looking at your hormones in general, I like to line it up with those 2 days, either cycle day 2 or the 7 days after ovulation. It's going to keep on going dark. It's driving me insane. Or the 2 days after ovulation. 7 days after ovulation, because then I can use it if I want to down the track with other results as well. So that can be really useful. But thyroid you can generally do at any time. The main thing, again, I feel is to keep it consistent when you are testing. Try and keep them at the same time, at the same lab, with the same doctor. And I feel like that is a really good way of doing it. So we've talked about which tests and the main ones that we're looking at. We've talked about when we want to test, so we definitely want to test on those important days. We want someone that can read them, as we spoke about. We definitely want your healthcare provider to understand, or this be their area of expertise, which I love, when you can get everyone on the same page. And I work with a lot of doctors, specialists, health providers that totally understand how important that is. And I love the fact that we've gotten to this point in time where we have this understanding and mutual respect for those that are smart enough to know that we're all in this together and we need to work together as healthcare providers. And there's certainly not one that's going to necessarily have all of the answers. It's a conglomeration of everyone coming together for you as the patient. And I call it your cheer squad. You need your cheer squad there that are on the same page, that you don't feel afraid to ask questions to, that are able to give you answers. Or there's some doctors that will say, I totally understand that this is important. I don't really get what it's telling me, but I'll do it for you, and then you can take it to somebody that's going to be able to interpret that. I've kind of gone through the how of testing, I feel like. Blood. Oh, saliva. Saliva is another one that we use a lot of in the clinic to look at. I used to use it for hormones, cortisol. I do use it for kind of the in-between, I guess. The main thing to realize is that if you're going to do testing, it does cost money to get proper testing done. And so that's also why I do like to start with a blood test, even though it's not the most accurate for all of it. It's a great place to start, I find. And, you know, a Dutch test is a very thorough test, but it's expensive. And that's why I find that you don't want to be doing that every month. You want to be doing it at a time where you really need to find that information out. Who to get to do these tests, again, that comes down to finding the right provider. And also for me and my patients, I want them to do it in a way that's not stressful. So how can I make that cost effective and also something that's going to save time and money? So whilst it might be a reasonable outlay to get the testing done, we want to do it in a way that's not going to be, we want to do it at the right time. That's not going to cause, in the long run, kind of go, I wish I had done that sooner. And so I feel like this is a really important conversation for us to continue to have. And I know there's some questions coming through. I can't see any questions yet on Facebook, I don't think. But if there are questions, please start to ask them now, because we're not going to be around here for very long. Actually, not much longer at all. But I do want to get through a few of these. So let's have a look. I'm really upset about my music not working, I have to say. So Lisa said trying to get full thyroid work is like pulling teeth. I know, it's very frustrating, and I feel sad that that's a lot of people's experience and a lot of women's experience. Like I said, I think a lot of providers aren't sure of how to read it. And so, I mean, I know that's kind of not acceptable, but again, you might, we've relied maybe on the endocrinologist to be able to read it. But also when we look at the world of integrative medicine and functional medicine, you never want to be, you don't just want to be average or within a range. You want to be optimal to feel good. And I think that's something that gets missed all the time. What's your optimal range when you profile it against everything else? The other thing that we do is we just pull out test thyroid, or we pull out ovarian reserve, or we pull out hormones, or we pull out cortisol, but we forget that that all needs to work together. So we need to profile all of those things against each other. And it does take years to learn all of this, and years to be able to see what needs to be seen. But thyroid, I think, is one of the ones that is a little bit disappointing, because most commonly we'll test for TSH. However, doctors really should be doing a full thyroid panel, because your TSH might be fine, but your thyroid hormones might not be converting. So your inactive thyroid hormone might not be converting to your active thyroid hormone. And that's something else to consider, that when you're testing TSH, you're not actually testing thyroid function. You're testing how much output does the brain need to give the thyroid for it to work properly. And it's quite confusing, because the more the brain or the pituitary needs to tell the thyroid to work, the less the thyroid's actually working. And it's a bit opposite. So it can be really difficult to decipher and determine these tests. And it takes a long time, I feel, and a lot of patients to see this, to really know what you're looking at. And sometimes I still have to sit there and piece it together. And of course, there are definitely people out there that don't fit the mold at all. And I've got to really sit there and think about what in the world is going on with this person, and whether that comes down to a combination of genetics and environment and lifestyle and nutrition and all of those things put together. What's Julie saying? Such a great debate to the doctor. Why do you want to test your thyroid? I know, but there are doctors that get it. And so we're not saying doctors are bad by any means. Doctors are amazing, but we've got to find the right doctors that are on our side. And they do absolutely exist. I think the other thing, just when it comes to GPs is they don't have a lot of time allocated to each patient. Unfortunately, that's not the way that their model works. So you might get 10 minutes at best with your GP, and it's not there. You're not sitting there going through a full, what are you eating? How are you living your life? What all of the things that you're doing when you see other providers that's their expertise to look at your lifestyle, to look at your nutrition, to really go down the rabbit hole of your results and hormones. So I understand it's frustrating, but I think we can take some of the frustration out when we know all of this information ourselves and we can see the right people at the right time and advocate for what we need. I think that's going to really help us to save some time, effort and money. Let me see what else we've got here. I see numerous tests a week and definitely see the 0.5 to 5 range more often. Totally. We're back talking about thyroid again, but Monica Anna's saying that she sees lots of tests, and the 0.5 to 5 range that I was talking about when it comes to thyroid is outdated. I mean, if I hadn't have updated something since 2003, I'd have my ability to practice taken away from me. This is the bit that baffles me, that it still sits there like this. But you can see how doctors get it so wrong. It's not their fault. They're just reading a lab report if they don't know this information. And it's why you're so often sent away being told that you are fine when you are not fine. So now you know this. Now you can take it and go, okay, I can see that's not working properly. The other reason or thing you do want to do at that point in time is then work out why. Why is my TSH elevated? Why is my thyroid not behaving? Not just, my thyroid's not behaving. It doesn't really tell you any answers. It just gives you a diagnosis. But you've got to look at why is that happening. Is it because of autoimmune factors or antibodies? Is it because of high stress? Is it because of environmental stress? There's lots of reasons. And I'm seeing more and more when I truly started getting invested and really curious around thyroid. I was seeing a lot of patients with Hashimoto's or autoimmune conditions. I have to say, in the last 3 or 4 years, that's swung, and it's so much more about stress for me and my patients, which is great news, because if I'm not having to address antibodies, it's much easier, but we have to be mindful of that. Can I please give some advice for estrogen dominance, the most natural tips? So I talk about estrogen dominance so often and so much, and there's so much information on my website about estrogen dominance. If you just go over to natcareandbuddhist.com and you type in estrogen dominance, you'll get